Hi friends, if you're new here, welcome. In this video, I am going to show you how to sew the Evelyn Combinations. I am so excited to share this pattern with you. I know I say that every time, but this pattern has been so long in the making. It is a historically inspired princess combination. This is not 100% historically accurate. I did look at a lot of photos of extant garments, primary source advertisements, and drafting manuals, but ultimately I drafted this pattern from scratch. If you're looking for a pattern that is 1000% historically accurate, you want to make a replica of a garment in a museum, this is not the pattern for you. If you're looking for a combinations pattern that is beginner friendly, that is buildable, something that you can make either super simple or that you can add a bunch of insertion lace to and ruffles and make it super frilly and delicate, this is the pattern for you. This pattern has two versions. Version 1, which has a simple single piece of lace along the neckline and no ruffles at the bottom. Super plain, simple, and honestly, these are my favorite. There's also version 2, which has a pieced lace neckline, which is a little bit wider, a little bit more delicate, and it also has a ruffle along the bottom. Let's get into materials. So for historically accurate materials, something white, cotton voile, cotton lawn, anything that is a very fine, lightweight white cotton. Also a lightweight linen. Of course, you can go and do any fabric that you like. I don't recommend going with any fabric that's kind of heavier than a light to mid-weight fabric. This garment just doesn't make a lot of sense in a heavier weight fabric. I would say if you're going for light and delicate, a cotton voile is great. If you're going for more hard-wearing, everyday kind of garment, then more of a lightweight linen is going to give you a lot more strength and longevity. If you don't have linen, you could also go with a slightly heavier, sturdier cotton. As far as sizing, I will put the size range measurements right up here. First of all, I really highly recommend making a mock-up. For those of you who are very short-waisted or long-waisted, you may need to adjust the length in the top portion of the garment, which can be done by slashing and spreading or slashing and squishing. If you want to save some fabric on your mock-up, you can cut the legs really, really short because the main part that you need to be fitting is going to be the torso. One note about mock-ups, the crotch seam is a curve, which means that it's going to stretch a little bit more if it's not finished with a facing like it will be in the final garment. So just think about that when you make your mock-up and know that if you don't finish it with a facing, it's going to be sitting significantly lower than it will in the final garment. Facings add a lot of structure to curves. We're going to talk about that more in a bit. In your mock-up, it can be helpful to like sew a piece of twill tape or just a strip of fabric or something to that line to get a more accurate measurement of where the crotch will actually sit when the garment is finished. Let's talk about cutting. The way that you cut the facings on this is to cut them from whatever fabric you have left over, and they do not have to be on a perfect bias. It is historically accurate to have facings that are on multiple different grain lines pieced together to create one facing strip. And this makes sense when you think about historically, fabric would have been a lot more expensive, and if you're going to make grain line sacrifices, of course the first place would be a tiny strip of fabric on the inside of a garment on a piece of underwear that no one is really going to be seeing unless they are literally examining your underwear up close. What I'm having you do is to cut out your main large pieces and then cut the facings from whatever you have left. Take the scraps that you have and see what angle you can get the longest facing strips, because of course you probably don't want to piece more than necessary. And if that is anywhere between a 45-degree bias and like a 25 or 30-degree bias, it is okay. And you can piece a 45-degree bias strip and a 25-degree bias strip together to create one facing piece. I have seen it on extant garments. That is not the case for the front facings, and the reason is because the front facings are center front, they're vertical, and they're actually meant to add a little bit of structure rather than the bias facings, which are meant to be able to curve and stretch a lot. So you do really want the front facings to be on grain, but given the shape of these pattern pieces, it should be pretty easy to fit them in somewhere. Getting into the actual sewing. Disclaimer, during this video you'll see me work on both white and black combinations. The black combinations I unfortunately haven't been able to finish because I haven't gotten lace, and the lace that I ordered got stolen, so you will not see those at the end of this video, but you may see them in future social media posts, so follow and subscribe if you want to see those. Every step that I talk about is going to be for versions 1 and 2 unless I specify otherwise. So the first step, which is actually step 5 in the instructions, is to sew the darts. There are darts in the front pieces and the back pieces. You can use whatever dart sewing method you want. If you want to ladder stitch and then pull the darts, or just fold them. They are symmetrical, so you should be able to just fold them in half and sew right along, which is what I tend to do because it's the fastest for me. The next step is to sew the inseams. You take one front piece and one back piece. Very important, it's not 2 fronts and 2 backs, it is 1 front and 1 back. I like to do this with a French seam. The next step is to add the crotch facing. So this is where the crotch is going to be open. So this facing piece may or may not be pieced from multiple strips. Lining up the facing piece right sides together with the crotch curve, which should go from the back all the way to the front and going from those notches that are on the pattern. Sewing with your normal full seam allowance, right sides together, and then trim that seam allowance down to around 1/4 inch. Press everything away from the body of the garment. Press that edge of the facing in half to the seam, and then press the entire facing to the inside of the garment so that none of it is showing on the outside. The exception to this is at the center back. You want to curve the end of that strip out towards the outside of the garment. Once that is pressed, you can go ahead and sew it all down, and it should look like a hem from the outside. You shouldn't be able to see any of the facing on all of this except for that little bit at the back. The next step is the main construction of this garment. So first we're going to sew the center back seam. Again, I like to do this with a French seam, taking the 2 back pieces, right sides out, sewing down the line, trimming everything, including those facing pieces, and then flipping it right sides together and sewing again. Then you can sew the shoulder seams and the side seams. The next step is version 2 only. So we are going to create the lace yoke. First thing is to iron the lace into a curve. This is one of my favorite techniques. I know some people find it a little bit intimidating, but I promise it's quite easy once you get the hang of it. This does work better with natural fiber lace because it's helpful to have a lot of heat and steam for this process. To curve lace, all you need to do is start ironing the end of the lace, and then as you iron, pull and curve the lace in this motion where you're pulling the lace as you iron over it. And the key here is to pull it into a curve rather than trying to push it or scrunch it into a curve. So take all of the pieces of lace that you want to put together and curve them. Remember that the top is where the edge is going to be, so if you have an edging lace you're using for that, remember to put the edge at the inside of the curve, not the outside. I will also say that here it is a good idea to use beading lace. What is beading lace? It is a lace that has spaces that you can thread a ribbon through. I don't know why it's called beading lace because there's no beads. But a ribbon, holes for a ribbon. So this is really helpful for the neckline. I will say this garment doesn't necessarily need the neckline to be pulled in. So it's not completely crucial, but aesthetically it's nice to have that ribbon there. And then once you have that done, you can sew them all together. So you have 2 options here. You can either do it by hand. I just like to hold the laces together and stitch between them. And the other option is to do it by machine with a zigzag stitch. So for that, you can either put the lace next to each other like this and not overlap them and have your zigzag stitch kind of go into one side, then go into the other side, and have the zigzag stitch bridge the gap between these 2 pieces. Or you can overlap them ever so slightly and still use a zigzag stitch to make sure that you're really getting both pieces of lace. It is possible to do this with a straight stitch, but I don't really recommend it, mostly because you have to overlap the lace even more to ensure that you're not leaving any gaps. And I will say, while the zigzag stitch is not historically accurate, if you use a really small one, it's very, very difficult to tell. Someone has to really be looking super up close in order to see that it's done by machine. So you can really get quite a delicate and historical look and feel to your lace piecing, even with a machine. Just to put that out there, no shame to people who want to use a machine for this. Yes, it takes absolutely forever to do by hand. So once you have your lace neckline pieced together, now we attach it to the garment. And this is versions 1 and version 2. So for version 1, you only have a single piece of lace, not a bunch of laces pieced together. I also recommend trying on the combinations at this point to check that you like the neckline height, because you might want the lace to start above where the edge of the fabric is, or you might want it to start below. It really depends where you want your neckline to sit. Then we are going to baste the lace on. Do this by hand. I really recommend it. You could technically baste by machine, but lace is so delicate that I would really advise against it. Then to sew the lace on, we're going to do this like lace insertion. So either by hand with like a felling stitch going across the edge of the lace and the edge of the body fabric, or you can do a zigzag stitch, again, bridging that gap between the lace and the body, although this time it'll be going through, the lace side is overlapping with the fabric, so you'll be going through both and then just the fabric. Anyways, the lace is basted on, we stitch it on, and then we are going to take out the basting stitches, trim away that extra fabric, leaving around 1/4 of an inch. You could do like 3/8 also, and then press that fabric under twice to create a narrow double fold hem and stitch that down, again, either by machine or by hand. So after the lace neckline is on, it is time to sew on the front facing. So you may have noticed in the pattern there were 2 lines on the center front. So that whole section between the center front and that actual edge is what is going to be overlapping on the front. I guess there was really no need for me to include the center front line other than if people want to adjust this pattern and have it like side closing for some reason, it would be helpful to have that line so that you know where to cut it if you want to change where the closure is. Let me know in the comments if you think it's completely unnecessary and in future patterns I should not have that line included. So to create the center front facing, the first step is actually to where that split crotch facing ends, clip into the seam allowance of the body all the way to where that seam exactly ends. So you have the facing, and then immediately after that, your body fabric should come out. So hopefully I have a good clip of this that shows that. Yeah, so I don't have good video footage of this, but I think this screenshot shows it pretty well. This is after I sewed the facing on, so jumping ahead a little bit, but you can see here the crotch facing ends, and then I've clipped right into the seam allowance there, and you can see how it is all pushed to the other direction, and there's no weird creasing in between that. So it's clipped all the way to the end of the seam, and then I have the seam allowance above the crotch facing pushed out, and that is what I sewed the front facing onto. Back to sewing it on. So then to sew on the front facing, we are sewing this is the on grain facing, right sides together with the center front, and just stitch that on, and be really careful at the end to have your stitches end exactly at that point where the crotch facing starts. When you sew on the facing, make sure that there is at least 1/4 inch at the top past the lace edge, and then at the bottom there should be about 1/2 inch. Once you've sewn it on, press everything away from the body of the garment. Again, same process, press it away, but then we're gonna take the top edge at the neckline and fold that down to create a clean finish on top, and then at the bottom we are going to leave 1/4 inch and then fold up 1/4 inch. And this should overlap with the leg facing to cover up that edge, and if you have extra leg facing, trim it off. Then there should be that 1/4 inch of overlap where you have the leg facing and then you have the front facing on top. And then we're going to press the facing in half and then press it all towards the inside. So you can see here you should be able to get a clean edge going from the front facing into the leg facing. Then to sew it down, I'm doing this by machine, sewing it down the center front, and then once I get to the bottom, this is just an extra security measure. I like to stop and pivot and sew all the way to the actual center front of the garment. So this just cleans up that connection between the leg facing and the center front facing. Then we are going to finish the armholes. So these are finished with a facing similar to the crotch. And you might ask, why do they have to be finished with a facing? Why can't we just hem it? You can hem it on like a sturdier linen, but especially for lightweight fabrics like a cotton voile, or honestly any lightweight cotton, it's really, really crucial to use a facing here. And that is because doing a narrow hem on a lightweight cotton is just not strong enough. I would know from experience, there have been numerous times where I was rushing through a project, I was like, oh, it's just for me, or it's just a sample, let me just do a hem really quickly. Every single time it rips. You will regret it. So we're going to do it the same way, taking the facing strip, right sides together with the garment, stitching it all the way around. You don't have to do a fancy join of the facing pieces. I tend to start at the underarm where it won't be seen, and then go all the way around, back to the underarm, and then kind of just end it by overlapping and folding under the top edge of the facing so that you don't have any raw edges exposed. Then we will trim down the seam allowance, press the facing and the seam allowance away from the garment, pressing the edge back to the seam, and then pressing the whole facing towards the inside of the garment and stitching it down. And then if you want to, you can add some lace. I got a question from one of my pattern testers, why not finish the neckline with a facing just like the armholes? And the answer is you absolutely can. The reason that I don't have you doing it is because the neckline takes a lot less strain, and if you're working with really delicate fabrics and really delicate lace, and you want to just keep the whole thing as soft and delicate as possible, Attaching the neckline the same way you would do lace insertion is going to be more delicate than if you do a facing, because you're not adding that extra strip of fabric and all the extra seams. If you want to make something that is really hard wearing, long wearing, something you could wear over and over and over again and it's not going to rip, doing a facing along the neckline is actually a really good choice. Whereas if you're looking for something a little bit more delicate, doing the neckline how I have it in the instructions is going to be better. Because the neckline gets so much less strain than the armholes, it's not likely to rip, especially with the lace added. The next step is, again, for versions 1 and 2, is to hem the bottom of the legs. So for version 1, this is going to be your hem, your final hem that is visible. For version 2, this hem is going to be hidden by the ruffle. So I recommend either doing a little rolled hem with a rolled hem foot or by hand, or doing like a 1/4 inch double fold hem. And then for version 1, if you want to, you can also add some lace edging. And I forgot to mention this, but for this lace edging and also for the armhole lace edging, you can either overlap it or underlap it with the edge of the fabric. It honestly is just an aesthetic choice. It's up to you and how you think your lace looks best. Moving on to the ruffle, this is version 2 only. The first thing is to piece your ruffle into a circle, into a loop. So take all of the pieces that you have that you need. It should only be 2. Make sure that your loop has no twists in it. We don't want a Mobius strip. It should be just a cylinder. And then hem one edge of it. This is going to be your bottom edge. I like to do a rolled hem with a rolled hem foot. Any narrow hem that you like will work here. Also, if you would like to add lace to the bottom, this is a great opportunity to do it before everything is all ruffled up. Then take the other side of your ruffle and create a 1/4 inch single fold hem towards the outside of the garment. So this is kind of unusual. Once the hems are done, sew 2 rows of gathering stitches along this edge. I did one for this sample because I was really in a rush because I had to shoot it that afternoon. But you can either do normal gathering, you can gather it by hand, you can also gather it with corded gathers with a zigzag stitch. Create whatever type of gathering you want around that edge just underneath your hem. The single fold hem and then your gathering line. Then take some pins or whatever marking device you want and mark the 4/4 of your ruffles. You can do this by folding them in half and then in half again. And then also mark the 4/4 of your pant legs. Line those up right sides together and then pull your gathering and arrange it as evenly as possible within those 1/4 sections and carefully stitch it on. Then press your gathers. The seam allowances should all be pressed up on the inside, and this is where that single fold hem is now up against other fabric, so you no longer have a raw edge that's just kind of hanging out. And the last step is to add your buttons and buttonholes. There is no determined number, and you'll notice in my sample, I was super rushing, so I did only 4 buttons, so that is why it's pulling a little bit. I would ideally have done anywhere between like 5 and 7 buttons, and you can start them either at the waistline or even slightly below the waistline in the front. Take a pretty color ribbon and thread it through your beading lace at the top. That is it. I cannot wait to see what you all make with this pattern. Please tag me, use the hashtag Ora Lin patterns on any social media platform that you post your makes on. I know that hashtags are kind of becoming irrelevant, but they are still helpful for me to be able to see everything that you make and for other people to see everything that you make. If you want to add lace insertion, I recommend doing it after the main construction step. You can also add a lace overlay. There are so many options with this pattern. I hope you enjoyed this. If you're a member on my Ko-fi page, you can get this pattern for free. Also, I do have a website. Last video I posted months ago, I did not have a website. Now I do. So go check it out, oralinpatterns.com. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!